They gave Paul Giamatti an Oscar-level villain role, cast Holly Hunter, spent $100 million and still flopped. Here are the 6 dumbest decisions that killed Starfleet Academy. Number 6. They put Paul Giamatti in 3 episodes and called it a day. Let's start with the decision that should make every producer lose sleep. Paul Giamatti, fresh off his Oscar-nominated performance in The Holdovers, personally reached out expressing his love for Star Trek and his dream of playing a Klingon.
My dearest wish in the world as a child and until this moment was to be a Klingon.
The showrunners gave him 5 different roles to choose from. He picked the villain. They were shocked. They assumed he'd want a single episode appearance. So what did they do with an Oscar-caliber actor who chose to be their season-long villain? They put him in 3 episodes. 3 out of 10. Giamatti plays Nus Braka, a part Klingon, part Tellarite hybrid with a galaxy-spanning grudge against the Federation. And when he's on screen, especially his monologue in episode 6, it's genuinely electric. Critics and fans who disliked everything else about this season agreed on one thing: Giamatti was magnetic. His presence alone justified tuning in. But here's the kicker. After building him up as this terrifying, charismatic force of destruction across the season, the writers fumbled his payoff completely. The finale reveals that Braka's entire vendetta, the rage that drove him to box in the entire Federation with Omega mines and nearly cause a second burn, was based on a misunderstanding. His homeworld's atmosphere was ignited by his own father's improvised distress beacon, not Federation weapons fire, not even Federation negligence. An accident that Starfleet barely had anything to do with. That's not a twist. That's a tragic waste. The moment Braka's grievance gets stripped of its moral weight, he stops being a villain worth fearing and becomes a sad footnote. They had the perfect antagonist. They used him sparingly, then deflated him on arrival. That's not a writing choice, that's self-sabotage. Number 5. Setting the show in the 32nd century when the perfect era already existed. This one was a creative disaster hiding in plain sight. Starfleet Academy is set in the 32nd century, the same far-future era introduced in Star Trek Discovery, 125 years after an event called The Burn nearly destroyed the entire galaxy's warp capability. The showrunners argued the setting gave them creative freedom from established canon. What it actually did was cut the show off from 60 years of beloved characters, familiar planets, and emotional nostalgia that Star Trek fans live and breathe. And here's the brutal irony. The perfect Starfleet Academy story was already accidentally set up for them. The final season of Star Trek, Picard introduced Kestra Troy Riker, daughter of Deanna Troi and William Riker, and it was literally a plot point that she was headed off to Starfleet Academy. She came preloaded with famous parents, built-in fan attachment, a familiar era, and the entire Star Trek legacy audience that's been begging for a follow-up show for years. Instead, we got cadets with no legacy ties in a century where none of the iconic species or locations feel the same, where the stakes feel abstract because the universe itself is unrecognizable. You can't make audiences emotionally invest in something they've never seen before when they're already emotionally attached to something you're ignoring. The 32nd century gave the writers freedom. It cost them their audience. Number 4. A 10-episode season for a show with 6 main characters and a season-long arc. 6 cadets. Each needs a compelling individual arc, plus a villain arc, plus institution-building drama, plus a galaxy-threatening crisis, plus the rebuilding of the entire Federation as a backdrop. In 10 episodes. This is like trying to fit a 4-course meal into a bread roll. Something was always going to get crushed. Reviews consistently flagged this problem. The show spent its first 3 episodes just getting everyone in the same room. There wasn't enough runway to develop each cadet with depth, so characters like Jaden and Darum got rushed, inconsistently written episodes that undermined whatever goodwill the show had built. Episode 7, the infamous Kozane, is the clearest example. Darum gets revealed as alien royalty, then immediately abdicates the throne in a single episode to return to school. A story beat that could have carried an entire season arc was born and buried inside 45 minutes. Meanwhile, the Caleb searching for his mother storyline, which drives the entire pilot, mysteriously disappears for several episodes before resurfacing in the finale. The audience noticed. Momentum collapsed. The irony? The showrunners originally designed the series to mirror a 4-year college experience. 1 season per academic year. Great idea. But you cannot execute that vision when every season is 10 episodes of compressed chaos. Streaming budgets forced a shorter run, and a shorter run made the ambitious structure feel like a promise the show couldn't keep. Number 3. Premiere timing that guaranteed they'd be invisible. Starfleet Academy launched on January 15, 2026, directly into the most crowded streaming battlefield of the year. Meanwhile, Taylor Sheridan's Landman was the most watched show on all of television in January 2026, per Nielsen data. Paramount Plus-owned shows were eating each other alive. And unlike Sheridan's output, which skewed toward the 35 to 64 age demographic that dominates viewership numbers, Starfleet Academy was designed as a YA-leaning, younger-skewing entry point into Trek. Here's the problem. Young audiences aren't the ones carrying shows on Nielsen's weekly streaming charts. The viewers who show up consistently, who drive the must-watch conversation, who make shows trend week after week, they're older. They're the same people watching Landman and 1923. Starfleet Academy had no audience crossover with Paramount Plus's own dominant shows, and launched at a moment when those shows were at peak saturation. Not a single episode cracked the Nielsen Top 10. Not one. In contrast, Star Trek Discovery, Star Trek, Picard, and Strange New Worlds all managed to chart. This show could not break through even with Paul Giamatti and Holly Hunter in the cast, because it was invisible in the noise of its own launch window. A December premiere or a March launch could have changed everything. Nobody made that call. Number 2, the audience score was an alarm they ignored. Within days of its January 15th premiere, Starfleet Academy had an 88% critics score on Rotten Tomatoes, and an audience score that collapsed to 43 to 51%, depending on when you checked. That gap should have been a 5-alarm fire. Over 38% of early IMDb reviews were 1-star ratings. Social media filled with mockery. Fans who weren't predisposed to hate watch were simply not watching. The gap between critics and audiences wasn't just a review bomb situation. It was a signal that the show wasn't delivering what the core Star Trek fanbase wanted, regardless of how objectively competent the production was. Critics praised the acting, the production design, the thematic ambitions. Audiences complained about the YA soap opera tone, the 21st century slang inserted into a 32nd century setting, the inconsistent pacing, and the sense that this wasn't really Star Trek. It was Star Trek-flavored content aimed at people who didn't necessarily love Star Trek. And who's actually keeping streaming shows alive? The people who love the franchise. The people who've watched every series. The people who rewatch episodes, who buy merchandise, who show up for the next season without needing to be convinced. Those were exactly the people being told to wait for the show to get better, while the showrunners insisted the critics were right and the fans were wrong. You can't build a fan base by alienating the fans you already have. Number 1. They cancelled it before anyone could find it. This is the most shocking twist, and it didn't come from the writers. It came from the studio. Season 1 ends. Season 2? Already finished. Filmed, edited, ready to go. The plan was a 4-season arc, each season covering a year at the Academy. 2 full chapters were still left. Paramount Global cancelled it anyway, not after Season 2 aired, not after giving it a chance. They pulled the plug while an entire season sat unseen in a vault. Why? Season 1 didn't hit the Nielsen Top 10. That's it. No patience, no runway, no second chance. And that's what makes this decision brutal. Some of the biggest shows ever, like Breaking Bad, struggled early. They needed time to grow, word of mouth, momentum. This show never got that opportunity. Even worse, Paramount had already greenlit Season 2 before Season 1 aired, only to cancel everything just weeks after the finale. It's the kind of contradiction that only makes sense when you realize the company was cutting costs fast. The result is a mess. A complete season no one's seen. A story that just stops. Characters who never finish their journey. This wasn't just cancellation. It was a show erased by its own network before it ever had the chance to matter. Subscribe if you want more.